So a few more notes about this line. The term materialist, when it's not being used specifically, may denote any non-Buddhist outside the Dharma, as is the case in the Parinirvana Sutra, where there's a debate between Lord Buddha's point of view and that of the materialists. But here, in the context of a description of the 4 kinds of views, the general word has a specific usage and is employed in a particular way for the view mentioned in this text. Moreover, the term does not refer here to those with wrong understanding, the materialists who are the followers of Brahaspati and hold nihilistic views, like the nihilistic extremists. It refers rather to those without any understanding. So one point we need to be clear of here is that when we speak of the materialists, we are speaking of 2 different types, slightly different types of materialists. There are those who simply give no thought whatsoever to past and future lives, who cast all thought of life and who cast all thought of life after death far away. And then there are those who focus solely on seeking pleasure in this life through politics, business, and the like. So their sole focus is on achieving material pleasure in this life alone. So both of these parties are materialists, but they have slightly different approaches. Similarly, when it comes to the extremists, we have 2 different types of extremists, and indeed 2 different words in Tibetan, which is sometimes synonymous and sometimes sometimes have more specific meanings. So we have murtukpa, which we can translate as, well, generally as an extremist, and more specifically as a nihilistic extremist. And then we have mutekpa, which we can translate as also as in general as an extremist, but more specifically as a eternalistic extremist. So again, there are some terms in which these words are synonymous, and there are some contexts in which these terms are synonymous, and others where they're used more specifically. So this is the case with the term materialist and also these 2 different terms for extremist. In actual fact, we could describe all non-Buddhist extremists as materialists in one sense. In any case, all of the non-Buddhist views can be condensed into the 2 types of extremists, eternalistic extremists and nihilistic extremists. And we can say that the materialists are nihilists, essentially, because they do not accept past and future lives, cause and effect, and so on, and they focus simply on experiencing the pleasures of this life. On the other hand of this, on the other side of the spectrum, we have the Tirthakas, the eternalistic extremists, and they believe that everything, they believe that there is a permanent self, an Atman, and that this is the source of all other things, the source and creator of all. They believe everything we experience, our happiness, suffering, and so on, is not created by ourselves, but actually created by an omnipotent agent, Mahadeva, or they might give this agent another name. And this deity is not only the omnipotent agent or creator, but it is also permanent. That's their belief. So they say the cause of all phenomena is this almighty creator who is permanent, but the results of this creator, meaning ourselves and our experiences, are impermanent. So in short, we can condense all outsider or non-Buddhist views into the 2 extremes of eternalism and nihilism. And here in our commentary, in this text, we find 4 non-Buddhist views enumerated. 4 are listed, right? The views of the unreflective, the materialist, the nihilistic extremist, and the eternalistic extremist. In other texts, we find a 5-fold categorization. We can condense all non-Buddhist views into the 5 Tarka or 5 Sophist schools. And these can be further divided into 360 different schools, which can then be condensed into 62 different views. And these are presented, all of these subdivisions and different schools are presented very clearly in Longchenpa's wish-fulfilling treasury from among the 7 treasuries. Longchenpa dedicates 50 or 60 pages to the non-Buddhist schools, so you will find a very detailed presentation of those schools and their respective views there. But to reiterate, if we condense all of these many non-Buddhist views, they can all be condensed into the 2 extreme views of eternalism and nihilism. Of course, there is a lot to say about each of them. For instance, if we were to look at the 5-fold categorization, the 5 Tarka or 5 Sophist schools, there's an enormous amount to say about each of those schools, but we don't have that kind of time, so we won't go into much more detail. So keep in mind the crucial point. The crucial point here is that all non-Buddhist schools can be summarized into the two extreme views of eternalism and nihilism. This is the crucial point. In one sense, to actually, even if we did have time to go into more detail and elaborate the various non-Buddhist schools, that might actually just unnecessarily complicate things for us. Most important thing to understand is that non-Buddhist views are either eternalist views or nihilistic views. So for most of us, for most of you, it's the most important thing is to get a grasp of the main points, right? The central main points, to get a handle on that. If you are really keen to engage in more detailed study, well then you can do that. Indeed, you can do that. To engage in really detailed, thorough study of the scriptures takes at least 10 or 15 years, at least a full-time study. So if you want to, one can take that route and train to become a Khenpo, a Geshe, Löpen, and so on. But if you don't have the time or intention to do that, then it's okay just to get an understanding of the main points. So let's continue with the commentary. We're on page 36. It refers rather to those without any understanding. These materialists and the unreflective resemble each other in that they fail to investigate the karmic law of cause and effect, but they differ in that the former do display some slight sagacity in securing the purposes of this life, while the others are marked by a particular lack of clarity. The latter comprise most of the beings in the higher realms. Consequently, the expression, those who do what is beneficial for this present life, has to be understood in context. If it's invariably taken to refer to the followers of Braspati and the like, the meaning intended in the root text will be understood. An understanding of the context of words with a wide range of meanings is indispensable for explaining all the treatises. So this is an important point. We need to understand the intended meaning of a given word in its given context. For example, there is a word sendapa. I'm guessing this is Sanskrit. It's just a note from the translator. Let's say a Sanskrit word called sendapa, which has different meanings in different contexts. This word is actually mentioned in the commentary, just a note on the translation, but it has been moved to the endnotes, endnote 5. So if you're at war, say, and you say, bring me a sendapa, well, in that context, sendapa refers to weapons like swords and spears. You are saying, bring me some weapons. But if you're sitting out in the sun on a hot day and you become thirsty and you say, bring me a sendapa, well, in that context, that very same word is referring to water. So the meaning of this word depends on the context, right? And so likewise with the terms materialist, the unreflective, the nihilistic extremists, eternalistic extremists, and so on. These various terms have their own specific meaning in certain contexts, and yet more generally, all of these schools can be condensed into the more general categories of eternalism and nihilism. So, just to clarify once more, for instance, when we say the non-Buddhist extremists, well, that could refer, extremist in that context can refer generally to all non-Buddhist schools. It can have a general meaning. But in other contexts, the word extremist can have a much more specific meaning, referring to a specific type of non-Buddhist extremist, right? And so it's like that. In short, it's important that we're aware of the specific meaning of a word in a given context, and that we are aware of the fact that a single word can hold different meanings in different contexts. The commentary continues, similarly also, where the Naishtika, literally extremists, Murtupa, are mentioned in the Kashyapa chapter. Kashyapa, my teaching, cannot be destroyed by the 96 extremists. It will be destroyed by my monks who are similar to me. The Buddha was speaking of non-Buddhists in general. And this is, we can say that these lines from the Kashyapa chapter of one of Buddha's sutras are a prophecy. These days, indeed, we find Khenpos Lopens, professors who are slandering the Dharma, denigrating the Dharma. They are professors of Buddhist studies, they're monastics, and yet they criticize the Buddha Dharma. So Buddha was giving us a prophecy. He was foretelling that his teachings will be destroyed by his own monks, his own followers, as he says, those who are similar to me. He's saying that if he or his followers engaged in debate with non-Buddhists, even with non-Buddhists of all 96 different schools, the Buddha Dharma will not be damaged by those non-Buddhists. However, it is his own followers, his own monks and followers, if they let their conduct and view become degenerate and incorrect, then those followers can cause the downfall of the Buddha Dharma. So this really is a prophecy, and it really is true, isn't it? Even during Buddha's time, we see disciples like Lekpe Karma, who developed wrong view towards the Buddha, and as a result was reborn in the lower realms. Then another disciple of Buddha's own cousin, his younger cousin Devadatta, who received many teachings from Buddha, nevertheless lost faith with him and developed wrong view. So this is how it goes. Guru Rinpoche said exactly the same thing in Pema Katang, the Chronicles of Guru Rinpoche. He said, "My teachings will be destroyed by those like me." So those who know nothing about the Buddha Dharma, who are clueless about the Buddha Dharma, they really are not able to destroy or damage the Buddha's teachings. But those who are well versed in the scriptures, those who are Khenpos, Lupans, and so on, well, they certainly have the power to damage the Buddha Dharma. If such people don't develop a proper understanding of the view, if they don't practice correctly, and then they conduct themselves in all sorts of distorted, degenerate, misleading ways and give rise to all sorts of strange, baseless ideas, and then, in spite of their learning, because of their own misunderstanding, they end up criticizing the Dharma, slandering the teachers, then they become samaya transgressors, and in this way they can really harm the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, from the root. They can damage the very foundation of the Buddha Dharma. So this is something we all need to be very careful about and guard against in this current age. We need to be more wary of those who regard themselves as Buddhists, more wary of their criticism, because their criticism holds much more potential damage than the criticism of, say, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and so on, and other non-Buddhists. People who are Buddhists, especially those who are learned, like Khenpos, Lupans, Geshes, and so on, if they behave in strange, misleading ways, and they criticize the Dharma and say very strange and negative things about it, well, then they can sow powerful seeds of doubt in the minds of others. They can make people think, wow, look at this teacher, he's acting like this and that, saying this and that. Is this really Buddha's teaching? How can this be so? Or they might actually think that what this misguided teacher is saying is actually a reflection of the Buddha Dharma. And then it'll cause those people to doubt and look down upon the Buddha Dharma. So this is potentially really dangerous, something we all need to guard against. The text continues, and the term Tirthika, excuse my poor Sanskrit pronunciation, and the term Tirthika Mutekpa is also used generally for the non-Buddhist proponents of eternalism and nihilism. In this text, however, the two terms Naishtika and Tirthika should be taken as general names for the proponents of nihilism and eternalism, respectively. Only then will the terms properly correspond with what they mean and reflect the intended meaning of the text. Now, with regard to all these, an analogy can be made with a precious jewel placed at a crossroads. Some people will not see it at all. Some will see it as a semi-precious stone. Some will see it as any common precious thing, and others will not see it as it is. Those who do not see it at all, not seeing here being categorized with the others as a way of seeing, are analogous to the materialists and the unreflective, who are presented together in that they do not understand the true and ultimate status of phenomena. Like the kinds of beings who are mostly found in the lower realms, they are as dull and stupid as cattle, not even knowing how to think in terms of earlier and later existences. Theirs is the lowest of views, for it is impossible to get any lower. It could be argued that since they do not follow a path, it's inappropriate to say that they have a view. However, because their minds are saturated with ignorance, their view is in fact a state of not having any understanding. Consequently, when one is establishing the proper view, their position is something to be rejected. In this respect, while most beings cling to substantial existence and abide by the view of the transitory composite, on account of their feeble thinking and understanding, they consider cause and result to be real, and are oppressed by the gloom of their view, in which nothing is specifically analyzed. This is why we speak of their having a view. So, to sum up, what's being said here is that, okay, let's use an analogy. The analogy is that of a precious jewel placed at a crossroad, an incredibly precious jewel, let's say a wish-fulfilling jewel. is placed at a crossroads. So various people walk up to the crossroads, and some will not see the jewel at all. They won't register the presence of the stone. Some will see it, but they'll take it to be a semi-precious stone or even a synthetic stone that has no value, so they won't pay much attention. Still others will see it as a common precious thing. So they'll understand, some others will understand that this is a precious stone, but they won't recognize its value. They won't recognize the degree of its value, the extent of its value. And still others will see the jewel for what it is. So, sorry, I'll just sum up. We have some people who walk up to the crossroads and don't see the stone at all. Others who see it but basically think it's a fake. Others who recognize that it is a precious stone, but they don't recognize quite how precious it is. And then there are others still who see it for what it is and recognize that it's a wish-fulfilling jewel. Or we could say an incredibly valuable jewel worth many hundreds of thousands of dollars. So correspondingly, the materialist and the unreflective, and so on, the materialist and unreflective who we have just spoken about, they're like those who come to the crossroad and don't even register the presence of the jewel. They don't see it. The non-Buddhist extremists, whether they be nihilistic extremists or eternalistic extremists, well, they have seen the true nature of things. They have seen the nature of things or looked into the nature of things, but they have not seen the nature of things correctly. So they're like those who come to the crossroads and do register the stone. They see it, but they don't recognize it for what it is. They're like the person who sees the stone and think it's just a fake and not of real value. Then we have the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. Well, they're like the third category of people who come to the crossroad and see the stone, and they recognize that, yeah, this is a precious stone. They recognize that it's precious, but they don't recognize how precious it is. So the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, they see that there is indeed a way to enlightenment, that liberation and enlightenment can be attained, but they don't understand the full truth, the whole truth. They don't understand the inseparable truths of great purity and equality. They don't see the natural state in its entirety. What they understand, what they see, is that there is no self inherently present in the aggregates, elements, and so on. They realize that there is no self of person, and they understand that karma, cause and effect function. So those holding that view, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, are analogous to those who see the jewel at the crossroad and see that it is a precious stone, but they don't recognize quite how precious it is. Then we have those who come to the crossroad and recognize the jewel for what it really is. This is analogous to those on the path of secret mantra, the Vajrayana practitioners. It's only these practitioners who really recognize the full value of the jewel. So recognizing the full value of the jewel, they pick it up carefully, they wrap it in some clean cloth, they take it home, they polish it and clean it, and they use it accordingly, right? They make use of this precious jewel. We could also use an example of gold, right? So you could place a lump of gold at a crossroads. Some people will walk along and not even see the gold. They'll just walk right past. Then there are others who will come along and see it, but they'll mistake the lump of gold for bronze, and they'll just think, oh, this is some worthless bronze, and walk on by. Then there will be others who will recognize that the gold is gold, but they'll think, oh, this is just low-carat gold. It's a low-quality gold mixed with some impurities, so it's not that valuable. And then finally there are some who will come to the crossroads and actually recognize the gold to be what it is, pure, priceless gold, the purest of pure gold. So those who recognize the view of Ati Yoga, the inseparable truths of great purity and equality, who realize the nature of reality genuinely and authentically as it is, they're analogous to those who recognize this pure gold for what it is, or we could say who recognize the wish-fulfilling jewel for what it is. Those who don't register even the presence of the jewel or the gold, well, they're like the materialists and the unreflective. Those who come along and see the gold but mistake it for brass, they're like the non-Buddhists. And those who come along and see the gold but think, oh, it's gold, but it's low-grade gold, well, they're like the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. Finally, those who see the gold for what it is, who see genuinely and correctly, are the practitioners of the Vajrayana path. Okay, so with this we've concluded the brief introduction, and now we'll move on to the detailed explanation. So, detailed explanation of the unreflective and the materialists. So we begin with an explanation of the unreflective and materialists, and then we'll move on to an explanation of the nihilistic and eternalistic extremists. So the commentary reads on page 38, "What do we mean by the unreflective? They are those who have no understanding at all of the existence or otherwise of the karmic causes that produce all the phenomena we perceive externally and internally, and the results that they produce. They are completely unthinking, utterly ignorant, and bewildered with regard to the karmic law of cause and effect. The materialists, rejectionists, or seekers of obvious benefit have no understanding of whether or not there are previous and future lives, and put their efforts into the various methods for achieving strength, riches, and power in this one life. For this they rely on the explanations of worldly teachers, which do not lead to perfect liberation, in order to achieve goals limited to their present existence, securing a livelihood, the practice of astrology, the study of politics, and so on." So the first paragraph on page 38, "What do we mean by the unreflective?" further clarifies who the unreflective are. They are those who have no understanding at all of the existence or otherwise of karmic cause and effect. They have no understanding of the causes and conditions that produce all the phenomena we perceive externally and internally. They have no understanding at all of causation. All aspects of our experience, the external environment, internal phenomena, every aspect of our experience, all phenomena are the product of causes and conditions, right? Whether it be trees, plants, the external world, grains, rice, houses, buildings, and so on and so forth. All of these things arise through the coming together of causes and conditions, right? This is simply how things are. This is interdependence. This is the way things are. But these unreflective people, they have no idea about this. They also have no understanding, they give no thought to future lives. The fact that the causes we create in this life will determine our future lives. And they have no notion of the causes and conditions of gathering the two accumulations of merit and wisdom. They have no notion that through the gathering of merit and wisdom, we can attain the result of the two kayas. So such people are totally unthinking and ignorant. Thus they are termed the unreflective. Then we have the materialists. So the materialists, rejectionists, or seekers of obvious benefit. They also have no understanding of whether or not there are previous and future lives. However, they are aware of, and they do seek out the causes and conditions for achieving strength, riches, and so on in this life. So they give no thought and have no understanding about life after death, future lives, but they do focus on gathering together the causes and conditions that will bring them material happiness and achievement in this life. And to this end, they exert themselves. They think, okay, how can I become influential? How can I become powerful? How can I become rich? And actually, this is the mindset of most people. I need to get rich. Okay, how do I do that? I need to become powerful and influential. Okay, how to do that? Well, I'll get involved in politics or what have you. So this is how most people lead their lives, focused on just short-term benefits to be experienced in this life, the short-term goals of this life. And this is how people spend their time and energy, just on short-term benefits for this life, giving no focus or no consideration to future lives. So this is what we mean by materialists. And to this end, in order to achieve the short-term benefits of this life, then they rely on the explanations of worldly teachers and so on. They also have recourse to the secret knowledge of the world, the black magic of Benares divination rituals, the subjugation of demons, the propitiation of local deities, and the performance of wealth rituals, whether in person or through the agency of others. So these sorts of rituals are very popular in places like Taiwan, and also popular in Tibet, right? And people, those who are materialists will employ these various methods just for the sake of this life, in order to achieve worldly happiness and material benefit in this life alone. So this sums up the unreflective and the unmaterialists. To reiterate, these people have no idea whatsoever about past and future lives. They focus solely on this life and this life alone. So to go back to the analogy of the precious jewel placed at the crossroads, well, the materialists and the unreflective are analogous to those who don't even register the presence of the jewel at the crossroad. They don't even see it. They don't see it at all. So now we come to the explanation of the nihilistic extremists and eternalistic extremists. The nihilistic extremists have a nihilistic view. They think that all phenomena that fall within their purview are devoid of any kind of karmic law of cause and effect. All the phenomena that arise in their one and only life, rather than being propelled by the deeds of previous lives, have come into being just like that, like mushrooms in a field or bubbles on water, and in the end they are extinguished like lamps. So these days most modern scientists do accept cause and effect. They don't accept past and future lives. They do accept cause and effect within the framework of this life. Not only do they accept the law of cause and effect, we could say the function of cause and effect, but they've become incredibly skilled in manipulating cause and effect, in manipulating causes and conditions to bring about certain results. And that's how we these days have, say, fruits and vegetables and so on that would naturally grow only to a small size. Now, scientists, through their manipulation of causes and conditions, are making fruit and vegetables grow very large, or grow very quickly, or grow in the winter when naturally they would only grow in the summer, and so on. So all of these changes are the result of scientists' expertise in cause and effect. The nihilistic extremists, however, don't accept any kind of karmic law of cause and effect. They believe that all phenomena arise in this life and this life alone. And so our experiences in this life are not the result of our deeds in previous lives, but rather they've come into being here and now, just like that. So they don't accept past lives, they don't accept future lives. They think there is just this one and only life, this current lifetime, and this has come into being just like that, randomly. As it says, like mushrooms in a field or bubbles in water. Randomly, adventitiously, suddenly, without any specific cause or condition. And they believe that at the end of this life, all these phenomena will just cease to be in a puff of smoke, or as the text says, in the end they'll be extinguished like lamps. These days, many people hold a similar belief, right? Many people lack an understanding of reality, like any understanding of reality, and they think in this very way. So now we have the eternalistic extremists. The eternalistic extremists believe that the unreal self that they impute to phenomena, things that exist within a causal sequence, exist permanently. Among the eternalistic extremists, there are those who believe that the cause of everything is nature or prakriti. Prakriti is not produced from causes and conditions, and within its nature all phenomena evolve. For this reason, they say that prakriti and its aspects, phenomena, are not different from each other. Consequently, Purusha, the self, is said to be isolated and whole within itself. Their view, moreover, is that phenomena exist within prakriti like this from the beginning, and there is no other cause that produces them. So the eternalistic extremists, they believe that this permanent self is the cause of all other phenomena. And they believe that those resultant phenomena are also permanent. So they believe both cause and effect are permanent. But in actual fact, if cause and effect are both permanent, then nothing could come about, nothing could function. It simply isn't possible for cause and effect to be permanent. To have a permanent cause that's the agent and producer of permanent results. Such causality is not possible. But nevertheless, this is what the eternalistic extremists believe, and thus they impute a permanent self onto phenomena, and they hold this belief. So among the eternalistic extremists, there are those who believe that the cause of everything is a nature or prakriti, which is not produced from causes and conditions, and so on. And it is within its nature that all phenomena evolve. So, these proponents believe that essentially all phenomena, all myriad phenomena in their fundamental nature these proponents believe that since the source and creator of all phenomena is Prakriti, this nature, then even though all sorts of different phenomena appear to be different, nevertheless, Prakriti and its aspects, meaning phenomena, are not actually different from each other. This is their belief. And consequently, Purush, the self, is said to be isolated, or we could say singular and whole within itself. Their view, moreover, is that phenomena exist within Prakriti like this from the beginning, and there's no other cause that produces them. So they believe that all things, houses and mountains and fields and the like, exist primordially from the beginning within Prakriti, this basic nature. And they believe that there is no other cause that produces these phenomena. So thus, these proponents believe phenomena have no cause. They're not produced from causes. They're simply produced from or emerge from the self, from Prakriti. One might well ask how they can say that there is an effect that does not depend on a cause, to which they would reply that existence is indeed an effect, in the sense that it is accomplished in the same way that one says that space is accomplished primordially. This is their single principle. So they believe that causes of phenomena do not exist. Causes do not exist, but the self or Prakriti exists. Causes are not established, they say, but nevertheless effects are established. This is their position. But how can this be tenable? How can you talk about an effect without a cause? You cannot isolate effect from cause. You can't have an effect that lacks a cause. For instance, a barley sprout. Well, a barley sprout is the effect of a barley seed, right? You cannot have a barley sprout without its cause, a barley seed. But nevertheless, according to these eternalistic proponents, they say there is no real cause and effect. Everything is produced by Prakriti, and this Prakriti, is permanent, singular, and whole. So, in this way, one might well ask how they can say that there is an effect that doesn't depend on a cause. How can you have an effect without a cause? To which these proponents would reply that existence is indeed an effect. So they say that the mere existence and presence of things, like the table and so on and so forth, these things are effects. So this is their position. In actual fact, everything that exists, everything that occurs, has arisen from certain causes and conditions, right? Whether it be wood or iron or flowers or each of us. Everything, without exception, is the result of certain causes and conditions. We might not be aware of what those specific causes and conditions are, but nevertheless, it doesn't change the fact that everything is the result of causes and conditions. For instance, you might not know who your parents are, but that does not mean that you weren't born from parents. It doesn't change the fact that you are the result of your parents, that you are the production of your parents, right? But these proponents just say, well, the existence or presence of things, that's the effect. Well, everyone's aware of that, right? Everyone is aware, of course, that everything that exists is the effect of something. But these proponents are not aware of the causes and conditions that lead to those effects, that cause those effects. They just say everything is naturally accomplished, everything is naturally present, in the same way that one says space is accomplished primordially, accomplished meaning established or present primordially. And this, as the text says, is their single principle. Thus they have a mistaken understanding, a wrong understanding of karmic cause and effect. Cause and effect are, in fact, interdependent, right? They rely on each other. They're mutually dependent, or we could say interdependent. This party, however, proposes that effects are accomplished without dependence on their respective causes, but that is simply not possible. It's not correct. If you were to ask them, well, how is it that things come about? How is it that things are produced? They would respond, oh, it's the Almighty Creator, Mahadev, and so on, who produces everything. Well, as the text says, this is an incorrect view of causality. Those who have an incorrect view of causality believe in the person of an Almighty God who exists from all eternity. This permanent entity has created all things, animate and inanimate, and has power over them. And in order to propitiate this all-powerful being, they sacrifice large numbers of animals and so on. Their view comprises two beliefs, a permanent God and impermanent manifestations. Their assertions amount to saying that non-virtuous actions can lead to higher rebirth, or that a permanent cause can give rise to impermanent results. So this is their belief, but if an Almighty God, who is permanent and who exists from all eternity, if an Almighty God, who is permanent and exists since eternity, if they are the creator of all things, well, why then is it necessary for us to sow barley seeds if we want to get a barley harvest? If the creator of all things was this Almighty God, well, such actions would not be necessary, right? Such effort would not be necessary. We could enjoy the result of a harvest without relying on the seed and planting the seed. It's common knowledge, right, that if you want a result, you have to cultivate the cause of that result. Every worldly person knows this. Every simple person in the world is very aware of this. But it seems that ignorant of this basic fact, or ignoring this basic fact, these non-Buddhists, namely certain Hindu followers, they believe that things do not arise from their causes, but instead from an almighty God or creator. And not only do they believe that this almighty God is the creator of everything, but they also believe that this God is permanent, which makes things even more complicated. So this permanent entity has created all things, animate and inanimate, and has power over them. Animate refers to things that move, right? So namely all sentient beings or living creatures. The inanimate refers to that which does not move, so the external world, mountains, fields, and so on and so forth. These proponents believe that Almighty God has created all things, the environment and all beings within it. And so in order to propitiate this all-powerful Creator God, then they sacrifice large numbers of animals and so on. They make blood sacrifices of sheep, goats, ox, and so on. And they believe that as a result, then all of their endeavors will go smoothly. By pleasing God in this way, they'll enjoy good harvest, good luck, success, prosperity, and so on. All of this stems from a lack of understanding cause and effect, thinking mistakenly that things are produced by an almighty God and not through the interdependence of cause and effects. So it's not just the Hindus who hold such a belief. In fact, in the Islamic tradition and the Christian tradition, people believe the same thing. They believe that everything, the world, beings, and so on, were created by an almighty God, by divinity. So these are all forms of eternalistic extremism. They are all forms of eternalist view. And this is not what Buddha taught. Buddha did not teach that phenomena were created by an omnipotent agent. Rather, he taught that all phenomena are the manifestations of interdependence. They are the result of causes and conditions coming together. In short, Buddha taught that all things are the manifestation of interdependence, the result of their respective causes and conditions coming together. They are not, as non-Buddhists would have us believe, the products of an omnipotent creator. So the view of these proponents comprises two beliefs, a permanent God and impermanent manifestations. So the first of these two beliefs, a permanent God, is the single principle of these proponents that was described above in the previous passage. And now the second aspect of their belief, impermanent manifestations. So they believe that permanent God creates all things, and the creations themselves are impermanent. So previously we saw that the nihilistic extremists do not believe in cause and effect at all. Here we see that the eternalistic extremists, they do believe in causality, but it is an incorrect view of causality. They have an incorrect view of causality. They believe Almighty God to be the cause of everything, but that is incorrect. So therefore their view of causality is wrong. So they believe in a permanent God and impermanent manifestations. Let's think about this. Well, so the creator of everything is the permanent God, they believe. This permanent God does not get sick or die or fluctuate. They are not subject to change. But we, their creations, on the other hand, we do, right? We are impermanent by nature. We fall sick, we die, we change. But how can this be correct, actually? How can you have a cause that is permanent and an effect that is the opposite, impermanent? Cause and effect should be or must be of a similar kind. They should be of a similar kind or a similar type. So it's not actually possible to have a cause that is of one nature and an effect that is of an opposite nature. You can't have a permanent cause producing an impermanent effect. Their assertions amount to saying that non-virtuous actions can lead to higher rebirth, or that a permanent cause can give rise to impermanent results. So they believe that negative actions such as taking the lives of other beings, killing animals and the like, and offering them to God can lead to higher rebirth in heaven, and so on. There are many who hold such beliefs, actually. Many such extremists also believe that one should wage holy war for the sake of one's religion, that is a spiritual practice, that it will generate virtue and lead one to heaven. So many followers of Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam wage war on others. And we can see the trails of their warfare, the scars of their warfare through the course of history, and this continues in the present age. Buddhists, we have waged war in the name of religion much less, but still, unfortunately, you do find some instances of Buddhists engaging in warfare. Like in recent years, we've seen Buddhists in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, fight with fellow Christians, Muslims, and so on. And we have to say that those so-called Buddhists are not genuine Buddhists. A genuine Buddhist will never wage war on others. They'll never engage in conflict. Violence is not the path of Buddha Dharma. It's as simple as that. Violence is not the path of Dharma. It's not a spiritual path, and it is not Buddha's teaching. So some might engage in a so-called holy war or engage in conflict for the sake of their religion, but that is not genuine religion, that is not genuine Dharma. The text continues, those who consider that whereas the cause is real, the effects are unreal, believe in a creator as a causal factor. They assert a permanent self the size of a thumb and so on, like a little bird that flies out when the pot containing it is broken. They have three beliefs. They claim that the permanent self only performs the function of a cause. They claim that the nature of its resulting creations, the aggregates, is phenomena that are impermanent and changing, and they claim that the results themselves only occur once. They do not have the potential to create other aggregates, and the process stops there. These extreme positions of eternalism and nihilism include all aspects, without exception, of non-Buddhist, eternalistic, and nihilistic beliefs. So if we want to look at these non-Buddhist views in more detail, then we can look at the more extensive scriptures. In scriptures like Adornment of the Middle Way by Chandarakshita, we will find a more detailed presentation of the various non-Buddhist schools and also a detailed refutation of each of them. Likewise, in the Wisdom chapter, the 9th chapter of Shantideva's Way of a Bodhisattva, each of the 5 sophist schools are addressed and refuted one by one. So if we want to understand these points in more detail, we need to look at those texts and study those texts. So at least we should be aware that there are many more detailed presentations of these schools and also refutations of these schools found in the scriptures I just mentioned, and also other scriptures. Here we're being given just a very brief presentation. Those who consider that, whereas the cause is real, the effects are unreal, believe in a creator as a causal factor. So these proponents believe that the cause is real, but the effect is not real, and they believe in a creator, like an omnipotent creator, like Wangchuk and so on, as a causal factor. They assert a permanent self the size of a thumb and so on, like a little bird that flies out when the pot containing it is broken. They have 3 beliefs. They claim that the permanent self only performs the function of a cause. They claim that the nature of its resulting creations, the aggregates, is phenomena that are impermanent and changing, and they claim that the results themselves only occur once. They do not have the potential to create other aggregates, and the process stops there. So the first of these 3 beliefs is the belief that the permanent self only performs the function of a cause, so only acts as a cause, not as a result. The second belief is that the nature of its resulting creations, the aggregates, is phenomena that are impermanent and unchanging. So they believe that the creating cause is permanent, but the resulting creations are impermanent. So we already discussed this before. And thirdly, they claim that the results themselves only occur once. They don't have the potential to create other aggregates, and the process stops there. So, for instance, what we observe to be the case is that, say, a barley seed gives rise to a barley sprout, and that sprout then grows and actually generates more barley seeds, which then grow into barley sprouts, and so on and so forth. The cycle continues, right? Cause and effect again and again over the course of hundreds of years. But these proponents don't believe that. They think that a result is generated once, and then that result cannot generate anything further. The process stops there with the initial result. These extreme positions of eternalism and nihilism include all aspects without exception of non-Buddhist eternalistic and nihilistic beliefs. The four views described above are all analogous to ignorance, the opposite of knowledge. In this section, which describes the positions of worldly beings, Padmasambhava confined himself to a description of their views. He did not discuss their paths and results, for he considered that this would serve no purpose. So with this, we've concluded the explanation of non-Buddhist views. The four views described above are the one view of nihilistic extremism and the three views of eternalistic extremism. So these four views that we've just covered in the section of text above, we described one type of nihilistic view, right? And then three types of eternalistic view. What are these views? Well, first of all, the view of those who believe in a reality, an effect for which there is no cause. Secondly, the eternalistic view of those who have an incorrect view of causality and believe that if one propitiates the Almighty by making blood sacrifice and so on, one will thereby attain liberation. Then thirdly, the eternalistic belief of those who consider that whereas the cause is real, the effects are unreal, and they believe in a creator as a causal factor. So altogether, this makes four views, right? One nihilistic view and three eternalistic views. These are all analogous to ignorance. These are all immersed in ignorance. The opposite of knowledge, we could also say they are in discord with knowledge, they are in discord with logic, in discord with reasoning and valid cognition, or in more modern terms we could say they are in discord with science. They're also, it goes without saying, in discord with the Buddha Dharma, these nihilistic and eternalistic views. So these extremist views, they are in discord with the genuine view. They are in contradiction with the genuine view. That's to say, they are not themselves a genuine view. What is the genuine view? The genuine view is that taught by Buddha, the view of interdependence, which acknowledges that all phenomena are manifestations of interdependence. They arise from the coming together of causes and conditions. This is the genuine view. These views are in discord with interdependence, they're in discord with logic, and thus we can say that they are views in name only. They're not actually proper views, they are mere views, views in name only, because they do not perform the function of leading one to liberation. They cannot guide one along the paths and bhumis that lead to liberation and enlightenment. A genuine view should perform that function. A genuine view should be able to lead one to liberation and enlightenment. This is one quality of the view. There's so much to say about the view, but we don't have time to go into all of these details. So as the text here says, Padmasambhava confined himself to a description of the views of these four extremist schools. He didn't discuss their paths and the results. He didn't discuss the stages of the path that result from such views, and he didn't discuss the final fruition that results from those paths, because he considered that this would serve no purpose. There's just no point going into those details, since the views themselves are not even genuine views, they're just mere views. And as I said, there's so much more to say about these non-Buddhist schools, and we could refute them using logic and so on in a great amount of detail. If you want to go into this matter in more detail, then you should refer to Adornment of the Middle Way by Chandarakshita, and also Tsema Namjal, the commentary on valid cognition. So here Guru Rinpoche has given us just a very brief overview of these non-Buddhist schools, and as Mipham Rinpoche says, he has not discussed their paths and results or gone into any sort of detail, for he considered that this would serve no purpose. With this, we have completed the explanation of non-Buddhist views, and next we turn to the explanation of Buddhist views. So now we begin the explanation of Buddhist views, And this is comprised of, first of all, a brief introduction and then a more detailed explanation. So, the supramundane path leading beyond the world, which is related to the untainted path, can be divided into two vehicles. So, that which is related to the untainted path, or we could say the undefiled path. Well, what is the defiled path? Defiled means that which involves the afflictions, the disturbing emotions. So the tainted or defiled path would refer to the paths of non-Buddhists. In contrast, the path of Buddha Dharma is an untainted or undefiled path. It is a supramundane path in that it leads us beyond samsara to liberation and the state of perfect enlightenment. So actually these two descriptions of the path, supramundane path and untainted path, are basically referring to the same thing, the fact that the path is undefiled and leads us beyond samsara to a state of liberation. So in the root text, Guru Rinpoche's root text, it says, the path that leads beyond the world. So the same description of the path. The path is that which leads us beyond the world. So the path of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas leads us beyond the world of samsara to the state of liberation from the three realms of samsara. So if one attains a state of Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha Arhat through the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha paths, then one will have attained liberation from samsara, from all three realms of samsara. On the other hand, the non-Buddhist paths, they can never lead one beyond the world, beyond samsara. They never lead to freedom from samsara. They can lead one to very high elevated rebirths in samsara, like the rebirth in the highest of the form and formless realms. But after some time, one will fall to lower states, to the hell realms and so on, and one will just continue with no end in sight, circling in psychic existence from lower states, higher states, and back to lower states, and so on. That's why the paths of non-Buddhists are called worldly paths or mundane paths, because they do not lead one beyond the world, beyond samsara. So a supramundane path, a path that leads beyond the world, is a path that leads one beyond the three realms of samsara. And this supramundane path leading beyond the world can be divided into two vehicles. First of all, the vehicle of characteristics, which teaches the general and specific characteristics of phenomena and the characteristics of total affliction and complete purity, separately and distinctly, showing what is to be abandoned and what is to be adopted. When we say phenomena here, we're referring to all objects of knowledge, all things that make up the world, so aggregates, elements, sense fields, and so on. Everything that comprises the external world, everything that comprises the sentient beings that inhabit the world, the 12 links of interdependence, excuse me, from ignorance and so on, all the way up to aging and death. We can also list the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, and wind, that comprise the external environment, and so on and so forth. All of these phenomena, they have both general and specific characteristics. There's a lot to say about these terms, general characteristics and specific characteristics. Often it's explained that general characteristics are substantially established, whereas, general characteristics are imputations and specific characteristics have substantial existence. Like we could say objects like a cup, a bowl, and so on, their specific characteristics are substantially established, but their general characteristics, the notion of a cup and a bowl and other such notions, are all mental imputations. And this is explored in great detail in the literature on valid cognition, or pramana. So just to reiterate in more simple terms, we can say that specific characteristics are substantial, whereas general characteristics, namely the mental images we have of phenomena, are merely imputations. So as I've said, this is discussed in great detail in the Pramana literature. We won't go into that kind of detail here. So the general and specific characteristics of phenomena and the characteristics of total affliction and complete purity. Total affliction is a synonym for samsara, and complete purity is a synonym for nirvana or enlightenment. So the characteristics of samsara, total affliction, and nirvana, complete purity. These are separate and distinct. They are regarded and explained as being separate and distinct. So the characteristics and nature of the three realms of samsara and the characteristics, we could say nature of nirvana, are regarded separately and distinctly, and likewise they're regarded as something to be abandoned and something to be adopted. So samsara, the state of total affliction, is regarded as something to be abandoned, and complete purity nirvana is something to be adopted. Likewise, the general characteristics that are imputation are to be abandoned, and the specific characteristics of things which have substantial existence are to be abandoned, to be adopted. So this is the understanding and the approach of the vehicle of characteristics. The vehicle of characteristics is also called taking the cause as the result, or the practice of the cause. In contrast, we have the diamond vehicle, or the Vajra vehicle. The diamond vehicle teaches that total affliction, samsara, and complete purity, nirvana, enlightenment, are essentially inseparable and unchanging. So they are not regarded as separate and distinct, but actually as inseparable in and of themselves, and unchanging in nature as the mandala of the enlightened body, speech, and mind. So this is the view of Ati Yoga, the great perfection, the view of the inseparable truths of great purity and equality. Samsara is right here and now the nature of nirvana. Samsara is already enlightened. And all sentient beings who appear to be suffering, essentially, they are already enlightened. They are primordially enlightened. As the commentary reads, they are unchanging as the mandala of the enlightened body, speech, and mind, as the three vajras of enlightened body, speech, and mind. This is the original nature. This is the original nature of all things, samsara and nirvana. And this is what is taught by the diamond vehicle, or the fruitional vehicle of Vajrayana. So this was the brief explanation of Buddhist views. If you can understand this brief explanation clearly and keep it in mind as we proceed to the detailed explanation, then that will be very helpful. So moving on to the detailed explanation, this has two main parts, a presentation of the vehicle of characteristics and a presentation of the vehicle of mantra. We start with the first, a presentation of the vehicle of characteristics, and this itself is made up of two parts, a brief introduction and a detailed explanation. So we start with the brief introduction. For the vehicle of characteristics, there are three further divisions based on the degree of clinging to those characteristics by beings with different fortunes, aspirations, and faculties. So beings with different fortunes, or we could say different dispositions. Some have the fortune or disposition for the Shravaka vehicle, some for the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, some for the Bodhisattva vehicle. Likewise, beings have different aspirations. Some aspire to the Hinayana, others aspire to the Mahayana. And similarly, beings have different faculties. There are many different degrees of, could say, sharpness and dullness when it comes to beings' faculties. Some are just naturally sharper than others. So, based on the degree of clinging to characteristics by beings with these different fortunes, aspirations, and faculties, then within the vehicle of characteristics, meaning the causal vehicle, we find three further divisions. When it says here, based on the degree of clinging to those characteristics, well, it's referring to the cause and result that practitioners of the vehicle of characteristics regard as that to be adopted and that to be rejected. So, practitioners following the vehicle of characteristics, they regard the origin of suffering which is the cause, and the result, suffering itself, to be things that need to be abandoned, and they regard the path and the result of the path, cessation, as things to be adopted. So they regard these four truths, the origin and suffering, the path and cessation, as two sets of cause and result that need to be abandoned and adopted respectfully. So, depending on the degree of clinging to the characteristics of those causes and results, then we find three further divisions within the causal vehicle of characteristics. These divisions are the vehicle of the listeners, the vehicle of the solitary realizers, and the vehicle of the bodhisattvas. In the vehicle of listeners, practitioners themselves listen to the instructions given by others, and then they cause others to listen to them. So the vehicle of listeners, or we could use the Sanskrit, Shravakas, practitioners first of all listen to the instructions, meaning the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of its origin, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. They listen to the instructions on these Four Noble Truths as given by others, as given by other Buddhas, and then they cause others to listen to them. They cause others to listen to them by sharing this teaching, by teaching the Four Noble Truths themselves. So Shravaka, or listener, is comprised of two syllables, which mean to listen and hear. And there is a synonym for Shravaka is to listen and to proclaim. So to listen, this just refers to the fact that they listen to their teachings from others and then they proclaim them to others. So that's the vehicle of the listeners, or Shravakas. Then we have the vehicle of the solitary realizers, the Pratyeka Buddhas, who realize their result, the truth, all by themselves during their final existence. So what's meant by final existence here? It means the practitioner's last rebirth before attaining the state of Arhat, Pratyeka Buddha Arhat. So in this final existence or rebirth, the practitioner does not rely on a teacher. Instead, their habitual tendencies from training in past lives awaken, and they find themselves going to a charnel ground or a similar sort of place, and when they see corpses and skeletons, then they ask themselves, well, where did this come from? Where did this corpse come from? Well, this corpse, this skeleton, came from death. Where did death come from? Death came from birth. Where did birth come from? And so on and so forth. And they trace the origin of death all the way back to ignorance. And they realize for themselves that the cause and source of all the phenomena of the three realms of samsara is ignorance, none other than ignorance. And then, by meditating on impermanence, suffering, no self, and emptiness, the practitioner attains the result of Pratyeka Buddha. In this way, the solitary realizer, the Pratyeka Buddha, attains the state of Pratyeka Buddha Arhat. In this, their final existence, they realize the no-self of persons, and in addition, they realize the apprehended aspect of the no-self of phenomena, but they do not realize the no-self of the apprehending aspect. Then we have the vehicle of the bodhisattvas, heroes of enlightenment, or enlightenment beings, so named either because of their steadfast intention to attain enlightenment or because of their focusing on enlightenment and sentient beings. So when we say enlightenment here, we're referring to perfect enlightenment that transcends the extremes of existence and peace, that transcends samsara and nirvana both. And bodhisattvas, these heroes of enlightenment, are so named because of their steadfast intention, their deep-rooted, heartfelt wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all other beings. They are so determined and steadfast in their intention that they are willing to give their life for the sake of enlightenment. They're willing to remain in samsara for countless eons for the sake of enlightening other beings. So therefore, their intention is said to be steadfast. They have an indefatigable patience, an endless patience, we could say, no matter how ungrateful sentient beings are, no matter how long it takes to fulfill their aspiration, they're willing to keep at it and to persevere. Thus, their intention is steadfast, Similarly, they focus on enlightenment and sentient beings. So with prajna, with insight, they focus on enlightenment, and with compassion, they focus on sentient beings. These are the two aspects of bodhicitta, of awakening mind. For these reasons, because of their steadfast intention to attain enlightenment, and because of focusing on enlightenment with prajna and sentient beings with compassion, then these heroes of enlightenment are called bodhisattvas. This is the vehicle of the bodhisattvas, and in brief, these are the three vehicles that we find in the vehicle of characteristics. Now we come to the detailed explanation, and we begin with a detailed explanation of the listener or Shravaka vehicle. The view of those individuals who have engaged in the listener vehicle, that is, the appropriate path that enables them to attain the listener's goal, comprises the philosophical tenets that have been established with wisdom and in which they accordingly have definite faith. This is taught here in terms of three aspects: view, meditation, and result. The view of those individuals who have engaged in the listener vehicle, so the view of those following the listener vehicle, that is the appropriate path that enables them to attain the listener's goal. So the appropriate path refers to the specific path of the listeners, of the Shravakas, namely the path that trains in the Four Noble Truths, the truths of suffering, suffering's origin, cessation, and the path. The view of such practitioners, the view of such a path, comprises the philosophical tenets that have been established with wisdom. What do we mean by established with wisdom here? Well, we mean to have fully understood and ascertained the meaning of the Four Noble Truths. Then we can say that the view, the tenet system, is established with wisdom. So it's in this philosophical tenet system that they have been established with wisdom, and in which these practitioners accordingly have definite faith. So again, this is a philosophical tenet system focused on the Four Noble Truths: the truth of suffering, which should be understood; the truth of the origin of suffering, which should be abandoned; the truth of cessation, which should be attained; and the truth of the path, which should be followed. These four truths. There's actually so much more to say about the path of the listeners. For instance, their practice of the four applications of mindfulness and so on. That's one of several important points that should be mentioned here, but we don't have time to go into those details. So, the view of the listeners is taught here, or the approach of the listeners is taught here in terms of three aspects. First of all, the listener's view; secondly, the listener's meditation; and thirdly, the result they attain. In terms of their philosophical view, the views of the non-Buddhist eternalistic extremists and others are conceptual imputations concerning the whole of phenomena, that is, the aggregates, elements, and senses and fields. So, the 5 aggregates, the 18 elements, the 12 senses and fields, this is often translated as just sense fields. In any case, all of these phenomena are projected in a mistaken way by non-Buddhist eternalistic extremists. They are conceptual imputations. So, sorry to clarify it, the views of the non-Buddhist eternalist extremists are, from the perspective of the vehicle of listeners, conceptual imputations concerning the whole of phenomena. And as we just said, phenomena include the 5 aggregates, the 18 elements, the 12 sense fields, and so on. What do we mean by conceptual imputation? Well, we mean a projection, to project or impute the existence of something that is not actually there. For instance, the non-Buddhist eternalistic extremists, they believe in a permanent self, but there is actually no permanent self, there is no such thing. So the notion of a permanent self is a conceptual imputation. It is a projection, the projection of something that does not actually exist. This word in Tibetan, we could literally translate as adding on feathers. So when this refers to how you make an arrow, To begin with, the arrow shaft does not have any feathers on its end, does it? But you insert the feathers, you add the feathers to help the arrow travel more quickly through space. So those feathers are an addition, right? They're an imputation. So that's what we mean by this word. To impute or project the presence of something that is not actually there. The notion of a permanent self, Atman, and so on, as proposed by non-Buddhist eternalistic extremists, are merely conceptual imputations. There is no self. Within the 5 aggregates, the 18 elements, and so on, there is no self. And yet these non-Buddhist extremists believe in the existence of a self. Or in terms of our own experience, we think that I exist. We all think that we exist. Like I think I, Padmasambhava, Rinpoche, I'm here. I exist here in my body, and so on. And then if someone says something rude to me, then immediately I get angry because I believe that I exist. That Padmasambhava really exists within my body and my other aggregates. We're not aware that the whole notion of a self, of I, is just a conceptual imputation. It's just a projection. In reality, there is no self in the aggregates. But not understanding that, we mistakenly believe that there is a self, and then when someone insults us or says something rude about Pema Riksal, for instance, then we respond with anger. So that's what we mean by conceptual imputation. We could also say projection. And the self imputed by non-Buddhist extremists is a permanent self, right? Moreover, a self they believe does not change ever. The self that exists today is identical with the self that exists tomorrow, in the next life, and so on and so forth. These imputations take the form of exaggeration and depreciation. These imputations take the form of exaggeration, which, like we said, is to believe that something exists when it doesn't, and depreciation, so to deny the existence of something that actually does exist, like denying the functioning of karma, to say that, well, karma doesn't exist, there's no such thing as karmic causality. Why? Well, I haven't seen it with my own 2 eyes, I haven't touched it, I haven't encountered it, so therefore karma does not exist. Similarly, some proponents might depreciate the existence of the aggregates, elements, and sense fields. They might deny their existence. Say the aggregates and elements and so on do not exist at all. That is a depreciation, right? Because on the relative level, from the perspective of conventional valid cognition, the aggregates, elements, and sense fields do actually exist. On the level of conventional experience, from the perspective of conventional valid cognition, then objects like a cup, a pillar, and so on and so forth, they perform their respective functions, right? A cup can hold liquid, a pillar can hold up beams and a roof. So these things are not completely non-existent, are they? So those who depreciate phenomena in this way, who say there is no karmic cause and effect, there are no aggregates and elements and other phenomena, there is actually no self even on the conventional level, because on the conventional level of conventional experience, there is a self, right? Me, Pema Riksal, and so on and so forth. And to completely deny even the conventional existence of such is to fall into the extreme of depreciation, and that is the extreme of nihilism. Thus, on the one hand, non-Buddhists take as permanent what is not so, and on the other hand, they consider as non-existent what in fact exists. So the non-Buddhists either exaggerate or they deprecate. Their views thus comprise the view of nihilism, that things have never existed or do not exist at all, and the view of eternalism, that they have permanent existence, and so on. As long as one remains in either of these 2 extremes, the extreme of eternalism or nihilism, it is simply not possible to attain enlightenment. The listeners consider these views to be no more valid than the imaginary snake one might think is present when one sees a rope in poor light. What's meant by this example here of seeing a rope and imagining it to be a snake? Well, imagine that a rope is coiled. Imagine that a rope is coiled up into a pile, and it's quite dark. Maybe it's dusk. You can't see very clearly, and you're walking along and you come across this coiled rope. Well, you might understandably mistake it for a snake, right? And thinking it's a snake, you would then be filled with fear, thinking that a snake is lying in front of you. Actually, it's just a rope, but you've mistaken it for a snake. So these beliefs are just like that. They're just like mistakenly thinking you're seeing a snake when... They're just like mistaking a rope for a snake. So if I think and believe in an existent self, I think I exist, I Pamiriksa Rinpoche exist within my aggregates, and I Pamiriksa Rinpoche are small. Well, that is just like imagining a snake when you see a rope. Why do I think like that? Well, because I'm identifying the self with the aggregates and believing that a self is present in the aggregates. And to reiterate, such a belief is no more valid than the imaginary snake one might think is present when one sees a rope in poor light. Their view of the nature of the aggregates, elements, and senses and fields, which, just like the rope in the example, are the basis of appearance, is as follows. For them, the tiniest particles of the four great elements which give rise to gross appearances, the outer material world, forms and such like, and the instance of consciousness, the inner mind, exist ultimately or truly. So what does this mean? Well, they think, okay, the self that we imagine to exist in the aggregates, okay, that self, that person, does not exist. But the aggregates themselves, well, they exist. So what we're describing here is the view of the listeners, right? Because at present in the text we're going through the various views of various schools, right? From lower to higher, and so on. So we're describing now the view of the listeners, the view of the Shravakas. What do they believe? They believe that there is no self existent in the aggregates, but the aggregates themselves, the elements and so on, do exist. So, just as an imaginary snake does not exist, but a rope does exist, they believe that phenomena like a cup, a pillar, and the aggregates, the elements and so on, they do exist. The self we imagine to exist in the aggregates, well, that doesn't exist. That's just an imagination, like the snake that you might imagine you see in the rope. But the basis for that perception, the aggregates themselves, does exist. So to use the example of the snake and the rope, they understand, okay, the imaginary snake doesn't exist, that's just an imagination, but the basis for the appearance of the snake, the rope, that does exist. The rope does exist. How? Well, the rope exists as a collection of fibers, and those fibers have substantial existence, material existence. These fibers have material existence because they are comprised of tiny, minuscule particles that themselves substantially exist. So this is very similar to the view of a lot of modern scientists, particle physics and so on, or maybe quantum physics. Many scientists believe that all things are comprised of different types of atoms, subtle particles like newtons and so on. So the Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas, they believe in the existence of such tiny particles. And they believe these tiny particles make up the nature of the aggregates, elements, and sense fields. That is their reality, they believe. For instance, take the flask on the table in front of me. They believe its reality is that it's comprised of these tiny particles of the four great elements. of earth, water, fire, and wind, and it's these tiny particles that give rise to gross appearances, the gross appearances of the outer material world, of visual forms, and so on and so forth. So that's how they understand material phenomena. But then we have the mind, right? Consciousness. So with regards to this flask, then, well, I perceive this flask and I think, oh, this is a flask, this is a mug, this is holding my drink, and so on, right? I have this awareness, this consciousness. And well, the Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas, namely the listeners, they believe that the instance of consciousness, the inner mind, exists ultimately or truly. They believe in two partless phenomena. They believe in the ultimate existence of two partless phenomena, the partless particle and the partless moment of consciousness. So the tiny particles that make up matter, like the flask and other things on the table in front of me, those tiny particles have ultimate existence. So that's from the object side, from matter's side. But then we also have mind, right? So a perceiving consciousness that is aware of all of these objects. So like my mind now perceiving this flask on the table in front of me. They also believe that the fine instance of consciousness that comprise mind have ultimate existence. So we're not talking about coarse or gross consciousness here, like eye consciousness, ear consciousness, which perceive visual forms, sounds, and so on and so forth. Those are very coarse levels of consciousness, right? The listeners do not believe that coarse consciousness is ultimately existent or truly existent, but they believe that the most subtle, finest moments of consciousness, they are truly existent. So we're talking about an incredibly subtle instant of consciousness. In Vasubandhu's Treasury of Abhidhamma, it's taught, things which, when destroyed or mentally dissected, can no longer be identified by the mind, such as pots or water, they are relative. All else besides is ultimately existent. There's a lot we could say about that verse. There are two schools of thought here, the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika. So these are the two schools we find in the listener vehicle. And between these two, there is some slight disagreement. For example, the former holds that uncompounded phenomena are permanent, while the latter asserts that, like the son of a barren woman, they are completely non-existent. So the Vaibhashika, the former, hold that uncompounded phenomena like space are permanent, while the latter, the Sautrantika, assert that uncompounded phenomena like space are non-existent. They're just like the son of a barren woman. In short, both the Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas assert that the truth of cessation is an uncompounded phenomena. So they are alike, the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika are alike in believing that the truth of cessation is an uncompounded phenomena. When we go into more detail, we talk about an analytical cessation and non-analytical cessation. But generally speaking, they both agree. The truth of cessation is an uncompounded phenomena. That belief is then refuted with logic in treatises like Adornment to the Middle Way and so on. But anyway, we won't go into those details. So to continue with the text, and among the Vaibhashikas, there are numerous subtle disagreements on individual points of view. Nevertheless, they are all similar in asserting that ultimately particles and instants exist truly. They are therefore presented together. This is to say that among the Vaibhashikas themselves, we find various subdivisions or sub-schools who hold slightly different beliefs and points of view. So there are numerous subtle disagreements on different points of view. And likewise with the Sautrantikas, there are different sub-schools within the Sautrantikas who hold slightly different points of view. But nevertheless, all the Vaibhashika followers and all the Sautrantika followers are alike in believing that ultimately the subtle partless particle and the subtle partless moment of mind exists truly. And if you want to read about the different points of view of the sub-schools of the Vaibhashikas and Sautantrikas, you could look at all-knowing Longchenpa's wish-fulfilling treasury, where he presents the 7 sub-schools of the Vaibhashikas, the 7 sub-schools of the Sautantrika, and so on. So these proponents, these practitioners, they have understood that there is no self in the aggregates. They have understood that the self does not exist and is not present in the aggregates, but they have not yet understood that the aggregates themselves don't exist. And therefore, their path is not yet a completely pure, genuine path. So this concludes a brief overview of the view of the listeners. So now we move on to the meditation. The meditation of the listeners consists of the stages of concentration, along with meditation on the Four Noble Truths, the truths of suffering, origin, cessation, and the path. So we just covered the view, and what was the view? The view of the listeners was the nature of the Four Noble Truths. So through the view, the listeners establish or resolve the nature of the Four Noble Truths. Then when it comes to meditation, they meditate on or they familiarize themselves with the nature of the Four Noble Truths, suffering, origin, cessation, and the path. So they meditate on all phenomena comprised of aggregates, elements, and sense fields as being suffering, the nature of suffering. And they familiarize themselves with this truth. This really is the nature of things, right? In terms of our body made up of the aggregates, well, we fall sick, we suffer physical pain. The external world, it's not stable, it disintegrates. The environment changes and disintegrates. Houses crumble and fall down. So phenomena are the nature of suffering. That's how they are. Where did this suffering arise from? What is its cause? Well, its cause or its origin is the afflictions. So all of the pleasure and pain we experience physically, all the pleasure and pain we experience mentally, all of these arise from the afflictions. So the origin of suffering is the afflictions. So in this way, the listeners understand that basic phenomena, the aggregates, elements, and sense fields are suffering. They understand that the origin of this suffering is the afflictions. They understand that suffering and the origin of suffering are things to be abandoned. And they understand that suffering and its origin, when abandoned, result in cessation, a state of cessation, which, simply speaking, describes a state completely beyond suffering, and the origin of suffering, a state which is permanently freed from suffering and permanently free from the afflictions. To attain this state of cessation, one needs to follow the path, the truth of the path. There is so much to say about these Four Noble Truths of suffering, origin, cessation, and path in more extensive treatises like the Treasury of Abhidhamma, and so on, the Prajnaparamita literature, Ornament of Clear Realization, and so on. Then we find each of the Four Noble Truths further subdivided into 4 factors. So the truth of suffering is further divided into suffering, impermanence, emptiness, and selflessness, these 4. The truth of origin is further subdivided into cause, origin, intense arising, and condition. The truth of cessation into peace, cessation, perfection, and true deliverance, and the truth of the path into path, appropriate, effective, and truly delivering, making 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. And this is what the listeners meditate upon. This is what they train in or familiarize themselves with. The 4 truths of suffering, origin, cessation, and the path. If we were explaining this meditation in more detail, we could talk about the meditation on the Four Noble Truths in the context of the ground, in the context of the path, in the context of the fruition, and so on. In the context of the ground, then the Four Noble Truths are simply introduced, simply stated, this is the truth of suffering, this is the truth of origin, this is the truth of cessation, this is the truth of the path. In the context of the path, Four Nobles are taught as that to be understood, that to be abandoned, that to be attained, and that to be followed, meaning the truth of suffering is to be understood, the truth of origin is to be abandoned, the truth of cessation is to be attained, and the truth of the path is that to be followed. And then in the context of the fruition, then, it's taught that the truth of suffering need not be understood, the truth of origin need not be abandoned, the truth of cessation need not be attained, the truth of the path need not be followed. So these and many other subdivisions and elaborations are found in the Prajnaparamita teachings. So here I've just mentioned these one or two of these subdivisions just by name. We don't have the time to look any more deeply into them. So let's continue with the commentary. These are truths because they are without error concerning the nature of things as they are. So these four are called truths because they describe unmistakably the nature of things. This is really how things are. Basic phenomena, the aggregates, elements, and sense fields, they really are suffering. That is their nature. This is the truth of the matter, right? Basic phenomena, namely the aggregates, elements, and sense fields, are suffering. That is their nature. That is their true nature. This is really the case, right? We can see this to be the case. Anyone who has aggregates, well, just by virtue of having aggregates, they inevitably suffer, no matter how rich they might be, no matter how famous, no matter how successful, celebrated, and so on and so forth. They suffer inevitably, inescapably. They suffer physically, they suffer mentally, they're subject to death, and so on. So this is the truth of suffering, right? The truth of these basic phenomena. So it's because these four truths are without error concerning the nature of things that they are said to be truths, and they are said to be noble because they are realized by sublime beings, or alternatively, because they are noble by nature. So these four, suffering, origin, cessation, and path, are called truths because they accurately describe the nature of things just as they are, and they are called noble because they are realized by sublime beings, by noble beings. Or alternatively, we can say they're called noble because they are noble by nature. With regard to these truths, listeners focus on the four truths of suffering, origin, and so on, related to the three worlds. So the three worlds or realms, the desire world, form world, and formless realm that make up samsara, and they meditate on them in the form of their 16 subdivisions or factors. For instance, suffering, impermanence, emptiness, and selflessness, that are the four subdivisions pertaining to suffering, and so on. There is potentially so much to say about the Four Noble Truths and the meditation on the Four Noble Truths. If we were to go into it in detail, we could honestly spend just 1 month talking about the meditation of the Four Noble Truths. In due course, there arises the gnosis of the path of seeing, which comprises the 16 instants of knowing and acceptance. The 16 instants of knowing and acceptance refer to 8 instants of knowing and 8 instants of acceptance, or we could say patience, that altogether make 16. These are described in detail in the Prajnaparamita literature, such as Ornament of Clear Realization and Treasury of Abhidhamma, amongst other texts. And the various sub-schools of the Vaibhashika and Sautantrika have slightly different points of view on these 16 instants. Subsequently, they progressively eliminate the defilements related to the 9 levels of the 3 worlds. The 3 worlds, as we said, are the worlds or realms of desire, form, and formlessness, and each of these 3 is further subdivided into 3, lesser, middling, and greater. So then you have, say, lesser desire world, middling desire world, greater desire world, and likewise for the form and formless realms or worlds, making up a total of 9 levels. So, the defilements related to the 9 levels of the 3 worlds have to be eliminated one by one on the path of meditation. In this way, these practitioners achieve 4 results. So the 4 results of stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and finally the level of arhat. When they are freed from the first 3 or 4 of the 9 degrees of defilement of the world of desire, they attain the level of stream enterer. And each of these 4 results, the level of stream enterer, once returner, and so on, has 2 further subdivisions, or we could say 2 further stages. The stage of path traveler and fruit achiever. So one who has, we could say, one who is about to achieve that state, and one who has attained it completely. So when you add this further subdivision, then we end up with 8 levels of result, right? Which are often described as the 4 pairs and 8 types. So 2 types of stream enterer, the path traveler and fruition attainer, and then likewise for the once returner, the path traveler and the fruit attainer, and so on and so forth. When they have eliminated the 6th degree of defilement, they attain the level of once returner. When the 9th has been eliminated, they attain the level of non-returner. And when all the defilements of the peak of existence have been eliminated, then they attain the level of arhat, foe destroyer. So with this, we have completed a brief summary, a brief presentation of the view, meditation, and results of the listeners, of the Shravakas. If we want to go into these points in more detail, well, then we would need to look at more extensive scriptures like the Ornament of Clear Realization, a commentary on the Prajnaparamita, the Treasury of Abhidhamma, and so on, these more elaborate scriptures. It's important to know that this and other material can be presented in elaborate detail, but also can be condensed into summary form. So here we've been given a summary form, a kind of essential seed of these points, right? And if we want more elaborate presentation, if we want to go into more detail, then we can look at the more extensive scriptures. So now we come to the explanation of the solitary realizer vehicle, or the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle. We can move through this quite quickly because there are not significant differences between the vehicle of the listeners and the solitary realizers. They both believe in the partless particle and the partless moment of consciousness, so they both assert the existence of these 2 partless phenomena. One difference between them is that the solitary realizers, or the Pratyeka Buddhas, have realized the no-self of the apprehended aspect of phenomena. They have not yet realized the no-self of the apprehending aspect of phenomena, but they have realized the no-self of the apprehended aspect, in addition to realizing the no-self of the persons. So they have some extra higher level of realization than the listeners. So aside from that, the way that they train on the path, their meditation on the 4 Noble Truths and so on, is pretty much the same as the meditation of the listeners. So I'm going to move quite quickly through this explanation. The view of those who have engaged in the solitary realizer vehicle, that is, the path enabling them to attain the nature of the uncompounded essence that is the solitary realizer's result, is similar to that of the listeners. It negates the permanent self, the nihilistic reality, and so forth, ascribed by the extremists to the whole of phenomena, whether by exaggeration or depreciation. The solitary realizers differ from the listeners in that they have realized the absence of the phenomenal self with regard to the aggregate of form, one of the 5 aggregates, or more precisely, the aggregate of form comprising the 10 senses and fields with form, the 10 constituents with form, and the imperceptible forms that make up one part of the constituent mental objects. So the 10 constituents with form mentioned here refer to the 5 sense faculties of eye, ear, nose, tongue, and the body, which are all believed to have their own respective atom or particles, and likewise the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space. These are the 10 constituents with form. So all of these 10 are believed to have their own specific form or material atoms. And then the imperceptible form, well, that's another constituent that makes up one part of the constituent mental objects. Yeah, we could speak about these and go into a lot of detail, but we don't have time for that. So, by training in this, they eventually, in their final existence, attain their result, enlightenment as solitary realizers. Unlike the listeners, they do not rely at that time on a spiritual teacher. How they meditate is as follows. As a result of their previous habituation, acquired through following a Buddha and training on the level of beholding virtue, and others, they realize the meaning of the 12 links of dependent arising, whose nature is the 4 truths. So, as a result of their previous habituation, meaning their training in past lives, in their past lives, these solitary realizers will have followed teachers and followed teachers well. They will have trained under the guidance of their teachers well, but in this life, they do not need to actually follow a teacher. Instead, through the force of their previous training, they take themselves off to charnel grounds and so on, and they begin their training, their meditation. What do they meditate on? The 12 links of dependent arising, the 12 links of ignorance and so on, whose nature is the 4 truths of suffering, origin, cessation, and path that we described just a moment ago. The 12 links of interdependence are ignorance, formation, consciousness, name and form, the 6 sense fields, contact, sensation, craving, grasping, becoming, rebirth, old age, and death, these 12. And these solitary realizers, they meditate on these 12 links of interdependence and realize their nature to be that of the 4 truths of suffering, origin, cessation, and path. So the same 4 noble truths that the listeners meditate upon and realize, but here the solitary realizers, they come to understand the 4 noble truths to be the nature of the 12 links. And in this way, their realization of the 4 truths is more profound. It goes even deeper than that of the listeners. So this distinction, this degree of profundity, is explained in Rongsom's text, Entering the Way of the Greater Vehicle. So the solitary realizers realize the nature of the 4 truths by means of the 12 links, and this is a slightly deeper realization than that of the listeners. The 7 links related to suffering correspond to the truth of suffering. So from among the 12 links of interdependence, 7 of them relate to suffering, the truth of suffering. Then 3, namely ignorance, grasping, and craving, relate to the origin. Ignorance, craving, and grasping relate to defilements. And 2 of the links, namely formation and becoming, relate to karmic action. And those 2 links correspond to the origin. I'm going to reiterate. The 3 of the 12 links related to the defilements are ignorance, craving, and grasping, and the 2 of the 12 links related to karmic action are formation and becoming. And these 5 links correspond to the truth of the origin. Divestment of those factors of total affliction corresponds to the truth of cessation. So divestment, or we could say the abandonment of those factors of total affliction, namely these 12 links comprised of suffering, defilements, and karmic action, corresponds to the truth of cessation, attaining the truth of cessation, and the path that leads to this, involving the realization of it and subsequent habituation to the meaning of interdependence, corresponds to the truth of the path. According to another approach, each of the 12 links has 4 aspects. So these 4 aspects are the aspects of suffering, the origin, cessation, and the path. So according to this approach then, say the first link, ignorance, has 4 aspects: the ignorance of suffering, the ignorance of the origin, ignorance of cessation, and ignorance of the path. Then likewise with the second of the 12 links, formation, we have the formation of suffering, the formation of the origin of suffering, the formation of cessation, the formation of the path, and so on and so forth. So altogether, with 4 aspects for each of the 12 links, this comes to a total of 48 aspects. The attainment of each link corresponds to the truth of suffering. So the attainment of each link corresponds to the truth of suffering. The fact that each link is the condition for the production of the next corresponds to the origin, the truth of the origin. The halting of each link by the halting of the link preceding it corresponds to the link of cessation. So the halting of each link by the halting of the link preceding it. So this means by halting, say, the link of aging and death, then by halting the link of rebirth, then the link of aging and death is halted, and so on. This corresponds to the truth of cessation, and correct meditation on the nature of each link in order to bring it to a halt is the path. Thus for each of the links there arise the 16 instants of gnosis that take the 4 truths as their object. These 16 instants of gnosis are the 8 instants of awareness and the 8 instants of forbearance, making a total of 16 instants of gnosis, and these take the 4 truths of suffering, origin, and so on as their object, so that they make a total of 192 instants of gnosis. So this means that for each of the links, each of the 12 links, such as ignorance, formation, and so on, there are 16 instants of gnosis that take the 4 truths as their object. In this way, 16 times 12 equals a total of 192. So 192 instants of gnosis. These arise at a single sitting, and subsequently the result, enlightenment as a solitary realizer, is attained. So we'll stop here for today. Please now dedicate the merit